as a leader. Aletta.
Good morning, District 91.
Good morning.
Sunny greetings from Cape Town. You had been with me early that April morning. The air was crisp. It was about 7:45 in the morning. You would have seen me walking into this room, and in the room were about 25 people, none of which I knew. And I felt they were just staring at me, a little bit like you are now. And I remember at that time taking a deep breath and saying to myself, Aletta, you've done this before, you can do it again. And that was despite the heart beating, the dry mouth, and the sweaty palms. Ladies and gentlemen, that was me at the age of 8. I had what can best be described as a very nomadic childhood. And before you ask, I was not expelled from many schools and therefore had to move. It was courtesy of my father being in the mining industry. And he was a specialist shaft sinker, so wherever in the world they needed a shaft sunk, my mom, my siblings, my dad, we all went to that place. So to give you an idea of the geography of my childhood, I was born in an area called the Orange Free State at the time in South Africa. We moved a few times there. We moved to Johannesburg. We moved to Zambia. Then we decided we needed a bigger change. We moved to Northern Ontario in Canada. From there we moved to Tasmania. Then we moved back to South Africa and moved within South Africa again. So you'll understand that a lot of my childhood was a bit of a blur, but there was one constant, and that constant was change. And innately, as I stood in front of that next new class, knowing that I was going to be the new kid on the block, the one who spoke with a funny accent, I knew the rules of the game because I'd figured it out already. I knew that the way I spoke would, to a large extent, determine whether or not I had friends to play with at break time. And most importantly, if you're an 8-year-old young girl, how many birthday parties I would be invited. And looking back, I didn't realize it at the time, but a few years ago when I thought, why am I so passionate about speaking? It goes back to that childhood experience of mine. Because for me, it wasn't just speaking, it was a survival skill. And if I got it right, so much opened up for me. But if I got it wrong, I would only have 2 brothers and a sister to play with. And that, I needed more than that. So what I'm going to share with you today is really, in essence, strategies I learned as a child that I've now implemented as a speech coach with my clients, and of course, leading teams in Toastmasters. I'd like to explain to you how we're going to do this. Every performer on stage, and that's you, the speaker, needs a lovely assistant. And today I've chosen a charming assistant to help me. And I'm sure you'll agree that I've chosen the best person in the room, Pedro. Pedro, please stand. So Pedro, I chose him because he is very charming.
Oh.
And assistants need to be good eye candy, and I reckon that's probably a good bet. But he knows all of you far better than I do. And as I go through some of the elements of what makes you great and makes you an extraordinary leader by the way you speak, I'm going to ask Pedro to identify somebody in this audience that he knows is already good at that particular facet of public speaking. And then I need your help because we're going to honor that person. So we're going to practice on Pedro. So Pedro, just stand up. So if you think of an athlete who's a runner, there are runners and there are runners. And who's the best runner in the world?
Pedro.
Usain Bolt is one of the best, isn't he? And he's got that target or signature sign. So when he identifies somebody who's really good at public speaking, I want you to do that to that person. So let's pretend it's Pedro.
Go on.
And with that has to be rock star cheering or applause. So can we say, for Pedro, we're going to honor him right now by giving him the Usain Bolt treatment. And cheer, guys.
Come on, do it again. I enjoyed that.
So your job is to make noise when we honor people. One of the things in life that fascinate me is the American politics. They're particularly entertaining at the moment, wouldn't you agree? And if we set aside our political beliefs and just look at some of the individuals involved, there are 2 American presidents. Is this on?
Great, it keeps going on and off.
Okay. I'll just pretend it's on and somebody else can make the magic. There are 2 presidents who stand out for me. One is Barack Obama, and the other one is Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton is famous for many things. We're not going to go into all of those today. But one of the things that Bill Clinton is famous for is his ability to listen. So Bill Clinton is famous for being an extraordinary listener. And I've read reports of people who have interviewed him, journalists, who would agree with me, a fairly cynical bunch.
Try some.
Thank you. And journalists have gone to interview Bill Clinton, and they've gone into that interview determined that they don't like this man, for many reasons. And some of them have come out of that interview with a changed perspective. And apparently what he does is he makes you feel that you are the most important person in the world. He listens to you as if you are the only one that matters. Now, we all like to think that we're good listeners, don't we? But while you're listening, your mind's going, all these things you should have done, could do, will do. And often we listen, but actually we are rehearsing what we're going to say next. We're not fully present. And it sounds easy to do, but it isn't easy to do. But Bill Clinton has developed that, and I actually met someone who'd interviewed him, and he said to me, it's exactly that experience I had. I came out feeling amazing because he'd listened. And if you were talking to the most important person in the room, how would you listen to that person? How attentive would you be? How focused would you be? So that's our challenge as leaders, because a wonderful thing happens when you really listen. Can you think of someone who's really listened to you in the last few months? Can anyone? A couple of you. And I bet you immediately can think of that person. They made a real impression. But for many of us, we don't feel that we are listened to. But when someone really listens, they're fully present, they give all their focus and their attention to you, it makes you feel like you matter. It increases your sense of worth. And one of my favorite authors, a lady by the name of Olivia Fox Cabane, she wrote a book entitled The Charisma Myth. And she says that charisma is not something you're born with. It's a learned set of behaviors. And she introduced me to the concept of charismatic listening. And she quotes Bill Clinton as well, as saying he's somebody who embodied that. And it's such a cool concept. Because do you know that if you really listen to someone, you make them feel heard, you make them feel like they matter, they experience these good feelings because they feel their self-worth is increased. And somehow they attribute and associate those feelings to you. So they've done studies, and they said if you really charismatically listen, people think you are more charismatic. And you haven't said a word. How cool is that? So that's something as leaders we really need to try and embody. We need to try and develop, and it's a challenge. Whether it's you're talking to your significant other, or you're listening to your children, or you're listening to somebody in the shop, just try and be fully present and be the one who listens. So this is my first opportunity to call my charming assistant up. Pedro, I need you to point out somebody in this room who is an amazing listener, and that person is going to stand and be recognized by all of us and have rock star applause.
Well, the person I'm thinking of, can't see where she is. Seema Menon. She's around somewhere. She's obviously listening to someone. There she is. There she is.
Seema, well done. recognized for being someone who listens. Thank you. Thank you. Charming assistant will leave the stage for now. One of the things I wanted to just add to that, if you think of listening and you think of the word hear, if you just add a T on the end of hear, you get heart. And to me, listening is about listening with your heart, not just with your head. It's connecting emotionally with the person you're listening to, having empathy, setting aside your judgments and your whatever is going on inside your brain, and actually just being there for that person. Empathy is a big part of listening. The second thing that leaders do is they share their why. How many of you have come across Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why? I highly recommend you read it. His premise is that people buy why you do something rather than the what and the how. So they buy your passion, and your passion sells and connects in a way that's very powerful. And I experienced this a few years ago. I was in the market for a new car, and I narrowed it down to two options. One was an Audi A series, and one was a BMW 1 series. So off we went to go and do a test drive. And we went first to the Audi showroom, and this very competent salesman took us for a test drive. My husband was sitting next to me, I was driving, and the salesman was in the back. And the whole time we were driving, he was telling us wonderful facts and data. He told me, can you believe it? It was an automatic gearbox. But if you tapped the gear lever in a certain way, it would turn into a manual. I don't know why, but that apparently was important. And the whole time, he was telling me these really cool things, if I was interested in that. But he completely missed the point. He was talking to my husband. And that's a fatal mistake as a salesperson. But he was talking stuff that I didn't care about. I don't need to know the user manual of a car. I just need to know it can reliably get me from A to B. So I went away thinking, well, the car's okay, but I'm not super impressed. And I went to the BMW showroom. And this time I went by myself. And there was a lady salesman. And she obviously summed me up in an instant. Because we went for the test drive and she, told me a few basics about the car, nothing too highfalutin. And then she just said to me, Aletta, you look really cool in this car. So if I tell you I bought the BMW, you know I'm totally shallow. But it worked. She was talking my language. She knew my why with nothing to do with the gearbox. So as leaders, when we talk to people, we've got to connect to our why as a way of connecting to the person we're dealing with. And after reading Simon Sinek's book, so often in Toastmasters, I realized we made the error. How often have you heard somebody say to a new member or a prospective member, when you join, you get 2 manuals? Anybody join to get 2 manuals? No, we join to become better leaders and speakers. We don't join to get manuals. I'm so excited that Pathways is coming so that we can't use that anymore. You don't join and get 2 manuals. But I decided to put Simon Sinek's premise to the test. And at the time I was district governor. And we come to things like asking people to pay membership dues. And that's always a bit of a crisis time during our year. And normally I would have sent out emails saying, dear so-and-so, membership dues, this is just a friendly reminder, membership dues are due by the 30th of September. It would be really great if you could get them in. And remember, a due is not a due until Toastmasters International receives the money. Something on those lines. Looking forward to it. That would have been it. But after reading that book, I said, no, that's the complete wrong way to do it. So I turned it on its head. And I started off by saying something like, we all know that we have benefited enormously by joining Toastmasters. And we know that when people join and they become active in the club, they grow in self-confidence. And that self-confidence they take away with them to their family, to their career, to their community, to their place of worship. And as a result, they have more impact doing whatever it is they're doing and making a positive change. By the way, dues are coming. It's time to get those members to pay the dues so that they can benefit like you and I have. It's the same conversation, but it's a different emphasis. And what I found was that it was quite extraordinary, the difference in the response rate. Because so often when we send out emails, it goes into this ether, and we don't know if anybody has read it, nobody reacts, and so we send another one, and nothing happens. When I made it very passionate about the why, about the bigger picture, I suddenly got far more response. And I also learned that you've got to make it as personal as possible, even though sometimes that takes a lot of time. So I broke a few rules along the way. I soon learned that if Pedro waits for the division directors to contact the area directors, to contact the club presidents, by the time you figured out that one link in the chain is not working, 3 weeks have gone by, and you've made no progress. So I leapfrogged the whole thing, and I would communicate directly to the club, but I would copy everybody else involved. And to make sure that I wasn't being tripped up by a club president that wasn't fully focused, I would copy the entire club executive committee. And then I would take a screenshot of their DCP, and I'd send it to them, and I'd say, wow, you guys rock. You've done this, this, and this already so well. Do you know that if we get 2 more members, you get another DCP goal? Do you know? And carrying on with the why it's so important, the impact that club is having on people's lives. The more personal I made it, the better my response. And then I'd always honour the area director and the division director, whoever was working with them, so that they knew I'd had that conversation. The more personal I made it, the more I shared my passion, the better response I got. So as leaders, share your why. I came across a book in a bookshop recently, and the title caught my eye, and it said, if I could tell you just one thing, and I don't know who the author is, but they interviewed famous people and asked them what their one thing is that they could share with us. And Bill Clinton was one of them. And the author had travelled with Bill Clinton and his daughter Chelsea in Africa, and apparently there was a punishing schedule. And at night, most people just wanted to go to their room and relax. Not Bill. He was in the restaurant having selfies with a couple who was on honeymoon, or he was chatting to the bartender and finding out more. So he obviously loves people. And when they said to Bill Clinton, what's your just one thing that you could share with us? And he said, it's the more I go through life, the more I realize it's important for us to see one another. And that goes back to the listening. That really recognize that person, their worth, recognize their pain, connect with them as people. So your challenge as a leader is to start with your passion, to share your why. Now, my lovely assistant. Who in this room shares their passion?
The person who embodies the why in our district has been educating the district leadership team, has been educating the division directors and area directors for the importance of finances. So I'd like to recognise Beauty Zindi.
A few years ago I did a workshop at Doctors Without Borders, and it was their management team that was in the workshop, and one of the delegates was the finance manager, and her presentation that we were coaching her through was called Mid-Year Budget Review. Anybody excited? So we worked through it, and I took them through this process to clarify their message, and eventually the one that she came up with was, show me the money. I'm watching you. And I thought that was just such a clever way, because it was important that she watch the money, because the more she watched the money, the more there was money available for the things that are really important to that team. So Beauty, when they give you any brief, just tell them, show me the money, I'm watching you. If your house is anything like my house, he or she who has the TV remote control has power. Am I right? There are many battles in my house as to who presses that button. But if you see a channel you don't like, what do you do? Do you hesitate? How long does it take you before you change? A nanosecond. And we're spoiled for choice. So each audience that you're talking to, including this one, you're sitting there saying, so what? Make me care, but do it fast. So part of sharing your why is being immediately relevant. Because if you're not, someone's going to change the channel on you. So you've got to know your audience and you've got to connect with them in a way that's meaningful to them. It's not about you and the game you are playing. It's about your ability to add value to their game. And if your speaking can demonstrate that as a leader, they've got a vested interest in listening to you because you're talking about a problem they have or a hope that they have. So remember that TV remote control. When we talk about chasing numbers, how many of you have been criticized for, you guys are only interested in the numbers, the DCP, member payments, and we don't believe in that. Have you had that story? Okay. The best counter argument to that story is I remind people, do you know what it's like when you go and have your blood pressure taken? What do you get after you've had the blood pressure taken? 2 numbers. And the numbers in themselves are not the issue. The numbers tell a story. And that story tells the doctor what's good, what's not working, what to do next. It's the same with our clubs. Your DCP tells a story. It tells you what you're good at, it tells you where the gaps are. So you need to know the numbers so that you can take action. It's as simple as that. It's not about the numbers, it's about the story that the numbers tell. The third thing that leaders, really good leaders, do is they speak in terms of hope and possibility. Martin Luther King, with his famous speech, he didn't say, I have a 3-point plan. Because he knew that wouldn't work. He spoke about dreams. He spoke in very emotive terms, because emotion is what connects. So in Toastmasters, you have to speak emotively. Do you know what the most emotive word in the English language is? Any guesses? You. So when you're speaking, try and see how many yous there are in your speech as opposed to I. Because so often you see speakers and it's all about me, myself, and I. It's wonderful, but it's not relevant to you. So you need to speak in terms of possibilities. You need to speak in terms of people's potential. Another one of my favorite books is The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander. He was the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and he discovered so many leadership lessons in leading an orchestra. And he lectured at a music school that was affiliated to the orchestra. And he said that there were so many music students that were talented and that spent all day practicing, and there was such stress because they always needed to be perfect. And he felt that their ability as musicians was hampered because they were always anxious, always chasing these numbers, the perfect score. And he lectured at a music school that was affiliated to the orchestra. And he said that there were so many music students that were talented and they spent all day practicing, and there was such stress because they always needed to be perfect. So he decided to change it up and he said to them, I guarantee you, at the end of the semester I will give you an A. Guaranteed. All you have to do in return is write me a letter and tell me what you are going to do to deserve that A. And he wanted them to write the letter as if they'd already got it, starting with the end in mind. And it was amazing, he has some of those letters in his book, how people, when you helicopter forward and say, to become that leader that I want to be, this is how I would show up, this is how I would speak. And it's a fascinating exercise. And I encourage you to do it with yourself personally and with your team, to really get them to look as if they've already achieved it and to work backwards from there.
But don't speak in terms of facts and data. Facts and data, even though they are important, they don't connect. You need to speak not in three-point plans. You need to speak in terms of hopes and dreams and beliefs, legacies, those beautiful emotive words. And try and pepper your speaking and your writing with those words to connect and to make a difference with your speaking. So my charming assistant, Pedro, who here speaks of hope and possibility.
I think most of the people in this room. And it's wonderful that we have so many people who put themselves out all the time. But the person that came to mind was someone who just gets on and does. And I'd like to recognise Barry O'Connell, if he's around. He's busy out making opportunities, that's why he's not in the room.
Thank you, Pedro. Just to add a bit to the speaking about possibilities and speaking in an emotive way, there's a lot of power, and it's an inspirational technique, to speak about the bigger picture. So let me give you an example. A few years ago, I was involved with fundraising for my daughter's school, and it was like an 18-month project. And if I tell you, we handmade Christmas crackers by the thousands. We had hosted comedy evenings. We arranged food and drink events, and I mean, it was exhausting. And the joke was, it wasn't even for our daughters to have their matric dance, it was for the year above them. And I realized that this committee had worked so hard for so long. They needed some inspiration. And then I thought about what we were really doing. Sure, we were fundraising, but that wasn't the real reason we got together. We were actually part of creating memories that would last a lifetime. Because those young people would look back on those photographs and that experience of having that extraordinary event created just for them. Decades later, they might even be showing their children and their grandchildren those photographs and laughing about their hairstyles and their dresses, as we all do. That bigger picture motivated us to keep going. So when times are tough, what's the bigger picture? It's about leaving a legacy. It's about changing lives. It's not about chasing member payments or DCP goals. So think of the bigger picture and use those lovely emotive language in those words. Leaders, get out the way. If you've joined Toastmasters and you're very attached to whatever badge you have at this point in time, don't get too attached. Because what happens in the end of the year? Somebody else gets that badge. And that's the beauty of this organization, is that we hand over power and we give someone else the opportunity to learn. So if your identity is wrapped up in your badge, you're going to be very confused a few months from now. And it's not about you and your badge. It's about we, it's about us, it's about the team. So your speaking needs to demonstrate that you don't need to be on stage all the time. You don't need to be the one always talking, always leading. You've got a team. Them come up and lead, and you sit in the back row and applaud loudly. And leaders who do this are leaders other people want to work with, because it's not all about them. They're willing to get out the way and get somebody else on stage, somebody else who can develop and grow. One of the politicians that managed to do this is a politician a few years back in South Africa. He was the Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel. And he developed the system, which I thought was just ingenious. He created a public platform called Tips for Trevor. And he'd invite members of the public to send him suggestions that he could use when he was, redefining tax legislation or his budget every year. And he'd actually stand up in Parliament and he would say, I got a letter from Mr. Jones and he'd mention a little town that nobody had ever heard of. And he said to me, I should do this, that, and the next thing. Now, whatever Mr. Jones had sent to him, he might have been thinking of anyway. But suddenly he was able to acknowledge an ordinary member of the public as having a contribution to that budget. And he also positioned himself as somebody who was willing to learn from others, to be open to suggestion. And I think as a leader, that is so powerful. Unless you particularly want to be a dictator. There always are some of those around. But get out the way. It's not about you, it's about your team. Pedro. gets out the way?
Who gets out of the way? I don't. Too much of it to get out of the way. But taking that point of letting go, the leader who I'd like to recognise exemplifies that. Had the position of power, stepped back, but was there to help us and continues to help and support us. And that person is Jean Gamester.
You are blessed in this district to have very, very fine leaders over many years. I've had the privilege of working them for a number of years, and I love what I see, and I love learning from your teams. The next thing that leaders do is they deal with conflict. Each one of us has a different relationship to conflict. It took me a long time to be comfortable dealing with conflict. I grew up in a family where my dad had quite a volatile temper, so if he was in a good mood, we were all in a good mood. But if he was in a bad mood, we were all very tense. So I spent a lot of my younger years avoiding conflict. I would do anything to keep the peace, because that was easier than confronting it. And then I joined Toastmasters. And do you have conflict from time to time? Just a little, occasionally. And that taught me so much. And it taught me that you have to deal with it. You can't just sweep it under the carpet and pretend it's not going to rear its ugly head every now and again. And when my son was in primary school, he was involved, he was a victim of some bullying. And the headmistress was a lady by the name of Annette Woolley, very competent, charismatic lady. And she called me into the office to just brief me on what had happened. And I'll never forget her words. She said to me, I believe you've got to shine a light on conflict. So if there was bullying in the school, she would get the bully in, she'll get the victim in, she'd get all the people who witnessed it, and she'd get them all together. And then she'd give them each a chance to speak, and each a chance to be heard. And that was so powerful. The victim got to speak up in a safe space and be heard by the people or person who bullied him or her. The bully got to hear how that impacted the victim, which often they don't. And then the people who'd been watching on the sidelines had to give an account of what they did or didn't do. But it was such a powerful technique to get everybody heard. Everybody felt that they'd been heard, they matter. And then they were able to make positive change to resolve the conflict. I've learned that the best way, depending on your personality type, of course, the best way to resolve conflict, if I get an email criticizing me or an issue that is really, really upsetting someone, the first thing I do is pick up the phone immediately and phone that person. And that's an act of validation, that I'm taking it seriously. Now, the reason I say depending on your personality, if those emails push buttons with you and you're really upset, that's not a good time to phone. Then you need to wait until you can respond rather than react. But I found in 90% of the cases when I spoke directly with a person who was upset, that immediately brought the level of emotion down. And then I learned quite a bit about myself in the process. I'm a person who very rarely loses my temper. When I do, it's a big event. And have any of you had people on your team that they breathe and they irritate you? I have to admit, I've had some of those, and it probably says more about me than about the person involved. But I was dealing with this character, and I'd planned a big event similar to this, and I'd planned it months in advance. I'd send out the emails, and then the week before the event, this person phones me and says, I don't like the venue you've chosen. Now, I hadn't seen the venue. It was in Johannesburg. I live in Cape Town, and I trusted somebody else to make the choice. And I just said, there's no ways I'm changing this. 60 people have been invited. I cannot change this at the last minute. And he pushed, and I dug in my heels. And he pushed, and I dug in my heels. And eventually I snapped, and I just shouted at this poor man, which I never do. And afterwards I thought to myself, what on earth is going on here? And then when I really analysed it, what I realized is that the reason for my extreme reaction was the fact that one of my core values had been challenged. And I didn't realize I had a core value which goes something like this. You do your planning a little way ahead of time. You do all your thinking. When you send that out, it's all done. Any last minute changes reflects badly on you. So him challenging the venue change in my head was saying, well, people will think I haven't done my homework. I can't have that. It wasn't actually about him at all. It was about me and my core value. So when you have an extreme reaction to conflict, analyze why and try and learn something about yourself. And you've got to admit what your relationship to conflict is. Some of us actually don't want the conflict to end because it serves us on some level, especially if somebody else is getting into trouble. So you've got to make sure that you're being authentic and that if you really want it to end, you need to bring it to an end. And if everybody believed conflict was temporary, we wouldn't have wars, would we? But we get to the point where no one wants to back down, and no one wants to give up anything, or no one wants to say sorry, and that conflict just perpetuates and it's exhausting. So leaders deal with conflict. I'm not saying you'll always resolve conflict. Some conflict just doesn't resolve, but you can go a long way towards it. And when I was dealing with this individual who irritated me simply by breathing, I found one of my mentors, and I said, what do I do? And he said to me, you've got to respond with empathy. I said, what? I don't want to deal with empathy. I want to actually just kick this guy into touch. And the next thing he said, I've never forgotten. He said to me, Aletta, the movie going on inside that guy's head makes perfect sense to him, as does the movie going on in your head. And we're both looking at the same problem, but from two different angles. And that guy's just as passionate as me, just as talented, probably more talented. But his views are different to mine. And once you realize that they're not getting up in the morning determined to ruin your day, they're just seeing it differently. And that helped me step back a little bit and see the whole situation slightly differently. Another favorite book of mine, called Loving What Is. The author is Byron Katie. And she says most of the angst in our life comes because we don't accept reality. We're always saying, but it should be like this. And if it's not like that, it should. Someone's got to move it to the should be, instead of actually dealing with reality. And she takes you through a series of 4 questions to help you deal with this. Because if you had to write out a whole page about he never does this, he always does that, you know the story. It's always their fault, it's never your fault. And then she starts saying, well, is that true? And you start examining it. But the one beautiful question she has is, who would I be without that thought? How would I go into that meeting if I didn't think that person would irritate me simply by breathing? If I could leave my prejudice and my judgment at the door and just take a fresh look at that person, how would I show up? And that helped me a lot as well, to take some of my drama out of that situation and see it in a different way. My charming assistant, Pedro, who deals with conflict in District 91.
How about this? Personal conflict, Toastmasters conflict, team conflict. Why not have all 3 all at the same time? Well, that's what the leader I'd like to recognise decided to do. But this leader didn't just experience the conflict, but she reached out, got support, and took action. And that leader is Vanessa King.
It's not easy, but dealing with conflict is a lot healthier than pretending it doesn't exist. The last thing that leaders do is they validate. They validate for the smallest things. They validate for contributions that are different to your own. They validate the people who criticize them. Thank you for that insight. You brought up an important topic, and we had to deal with it. Thank you. That's what a true leader does.
You can validate people in a myriad of ways. It can be face-to-face, it can be an email, it can be a text message, a voice note. Whenever you've got a moment, after a meeting, during a meeting, before a meeting, validate someone. We thrive on validation as individuals and as teams. And you can't validate enough. Many years ago, I did my high-performance leadership project, and I have to admit I was fairly arrogant going into it. Because I thought I've done stuff like this before, I'm not really going to learn so much. And I was happy to be proved wrong. And I learned in that high-performance leadership that one of my strongest leadership tools was validation. The more I validated my team, the more cohesive we became, the more focused we became. And validation goes in all directions. Make a point of validating those that are higher up the food chain than you are. Validate those on the same level as you. Validate those in your team who report to you. Validate those who haven't got a badge. But you cannot validate enough. And people thrive on validation. I think this world would be a better place if we took time to recognize and validate one another. A few years ago, I did an inspirational leadership workshop in Zimbabwe. And the people there knew each other, and I asked them to tell each other why they found one another inspirational. And it was fascinating what came up. Some were quoted as being inspirational because they held people to a high standard. Others because they simply showed up. Others because they'd always be the one packing the chairs away at the end of a session. Others would be because they asked the hard questions. So validate not just the things that make you feel comfortable, but validate what is uncomfortable as well. So Pedro.
Back again.
Back again.
Right.
It's one way to make sure he wasn't zoning out during this presentation.
How could I? There are two leaders I'd like to validate who exemplify communication across the whole of our district. Arnold Sartre and Steve Veer. Wonderful round of applause for Aletta.
So let's summarize, because I see a red light looking at me and I would hate to offend anybody by going over time. The first thing that leaders do, they listen with their hearts. And they listen, they're fully present. They listen like Bill Clinton. You may not want to do other things like him, but they listen. Leaders share their why, and they start with their why, because that's passion, and passion connects. Leaders speak in terms of hope and possibility, not in terms of a three-point plan. Leaders get out of the way as often as possible to let others shine and let others take center stage. They deal with conflict and they validate. If you can incorporate that into your speaking in Toastmasters and outside of Toastmasters, you are going to transform yourself from an ordinary leader into an extraordinary one. Take the opportunity to look after one another, to recognize when each of you is doing that. We've recognized a few people here today, but there are many more in this wonderful district where you are already touching lives, leaving legacies, and having the most positive impact. I wish you well as you go on your journey of speaking as a leader, and I'm so grateful that I have the privilege of being here and spending time with you and hopefully adding value to you in the week ahead. So thank you, and go out and just be incredible.